Welcome, everybody. Thank you. I'm sure it's a very busy time for all of you, and we appreciate you joining us today. We have some really interesting data we're going to share. Before I walk you through that, I'll tell you a quick story, though, about this study that we do every year. We've done it for about a decade now. And when we closed out the survey, first of all, we fielded the survey. Let me give you those dates because you'll understand and appreciate the challenge that we had. We fielded the survey from February 18th to March 3rd. So if you think back, things were starting to appear in the media. I think some of the really savvy organizations, the ones that Andrea had a major convention happening with, tens of thousands of people convening, this was really high on the radar, the emerging coronavirus. We closed the survey, and then we went further into March as we started our analysis, and we realized that the data we had collected was almost completely irrelevant in some ways. So we really had to rethink what we were doing. And I feel like that theme of acceleration and adaptation, I'm sure it will come out with all of you today. And I'll be really interested in hearing any questions you have about that or insights you want to share with others. But it was certainly a real challenge for us and a reminder that things sometimes move very quickly and all organizations have to adapt to that. So let us show you what we did to address that challenge. First of all, for those of you who are not familiar with McKinley, we are a consulting firm. We're based in DC and Chicago with about 45 staff. We work only with associations, and we've done that for over a quarter of a century. My background, I've been at McKinley the longest period of time in my career. So my tenure's been the longest here. I started in the consulting area, and then I now work in industry relations. So overseeing a lot of our thought leadership and our presence in the community when we speak or partner with other organizations. And before joining McKinley, I was a membership director myself at a higher education association, and then I was on a college campus. All right, so today we're going to walk you through some highlights from this study that we do every year and have been doing for about 10 years. We're also going to share with you some results of 2 new studies that we've launched during the current pandemic and other insights that we're hearing around adaptation and innovation and challenges. And we really look forward to addressing the questions you all have posed and hearing some real-time insights from all of you today as we go. Okay, so first let's look at the economic impact on association study. An annual study, we look both obviously across that span of time to identify any trends and innovations, and that's going to be particularly relevant today as we walk you through the data. We also look across sectors. We don't go into that in significant detail on the webinar, but we'll make sure that you have a link to the report. We would love for you to download it and read it. And if you have any questions about some of the specifics in there, please let us know. There's also some content that we don't cover today just because we have an hour and we wanted to allow some time for conversation. So there might be other pieces in that report that would be interesting to you. We look at 2 major points. So one is the economy and how it impacts associations, and then how associations are responding to that. So some of their trends and innovations and even actions that they've taken. One note is that for 9 years, we called this report EIA, and we renamed it this year to Association Viewpoint. The survey goes out to association executives and staff. Some of you might have participated in this survey. Thank you if you did. We got quite a few responses this year. We took a new approach and partnered with 2 organizations. One is Association Analytics. It's a for-profit company in the technology space. We partnered with them because we're going to be coming out with a report later this year that focuses on the topic of data and analytics. We also partnered with the Council of Manufacturing Associations, so those trade groups, and got some really interesting insight from those as well. All right, so let me walk you first through the landscape. So in this section of the report, we look more broadly at the economy, so beyond the association sector specifically and some of the economic impacts that are happening there, what's happening in the US or really even across the globe. What I want to highlight for you here is a comparison of what happened during the Great Recession and what has happened in the last couple of months. And you probably all know this. I knew it when I started, working on the report, but until I really pulled this data, it wasn't as striking to me. So during the Great Recession, the impacts potentially were very similar to what they are today or what they will be in the next couple of months or even years. But the difference was that those trends happened across a much longer span. So GDP fell significantly, but within a 2-year span. Home prices fell significantly, 3 years. S&P fell significantly, 2 years. And net worth changed. So if you compare that to, at the time we were writing the report, it was about mid-March. And in the report, we cite how at the end of February, there was one state that reported an increase in unemployment. Of course, by the end of March, we all know that that had hit over 6 million unemployment claims across the nation. And then that quickly skyrocketed from there. So again, it's just a completely different accelerated impact that we're seeing in 2020. In 2009, so if we go back to that data, what were associations saying at that time? A significant percentage of those associations expressed concern over the state of the economy and how it would impact associations and industries. 10 years later, those concerns had virtually disappeared. So what we're looking at is a chart of the 2020 data. Remember, this survey closed March 3rd. So if we were to ask you or ask association colleagues what their perceptions are today, I'm sure they would be radically different. But I want to point out that for the only time in the history of the report, 0% of respondents said they were very concerned about the impact of the economy on their associations. So in some ways, it was challenging to put the report together and make it relevant, but we also had a view into a point in time immediately before all of this rapid accelerated impact really hit associations and hit the broader society. So things were quite good back in late February and early March. Again, this is reflective of, let's just say, pre-COVID-19. But there are a couple of things that I want to highlight. This hopefully puts, it kind of reinforces the confidence that we have in associations. Not that this will be easy to navigate or that associations will navigate it perfectly, but we do feel like associations were in a very strong position coming into this current crisis. Some reasons why. So throughout the research studies that we've done, leadership is really critical to top performing associations, whether that be strong staff leadership or a high functioning board. We probably all have stories that we could tell about either one of those that are not high functioning, and it really can impede the progress and the success of the organization. It was really heartening to see that new partners and opportunities for collaboration appeared so high in this question as well, because if you've looked at the media, we are certainly seeing that a lot of organizations are really pulling resources and coming together to respond to the challenges of the industry. And for many, many years, members have called on their professional societies to collaborate more and coordinate more. In some cases, it's because they pay dues multiple times and they can't afford to do that. But in other cases, it's that they really believe the collective impact of that would be much stronger. So about a little less than 1 in 2 associations were exploring that and felt like it was really contributing to their optimism about their association. Also adjacent growth, adjacent market growth. So beyond the core membership, where else could an association grow? It kind of diversifies participation and hopefully diversifies revenue. On the flip side, there were a few things that contributed to unfavorable perceptions respondents had about their associations. So even back at the beginning of the year, association professionals did anticipate that something would happen to the economy and there would be an impact to their organization. It's also was a strong theme coming into this that associations were seeking to diversify their revenue, and also that the political climate was unfavorable, whether that be regulation or something else. It certainly was a theme. What is happening now due to current economic conditions by year? So these are actions that associations are taking as a result of those conditions. So we have a variety of things here. We also have pulled out 3 points in time over the past 10 years to show you how these shifts have happened. This is pretty intuitive, but when you think about those more austere decisions that associations need to make, like budget cuts or hiring freezes, changes in investment salary strategy, freeze on salary increase, staff reorg, all of those things were really much more common around 2009. And that was data, that 2009 reflected data from 2008, actually, because it's a year-end report out on trends. So, so those were very common. If you look at 2015 and even into 2020, this was also really common. The theme was more around expansion. So they came out of the Great Recession having to make some tough decisions and really streamline and cut. And then they really looked to grow beyond that. Hopefully, again, from a place of strength, but certainly the theme of expansion there. The priorities associations have held over the past 10 years, we know from the Great Recession, and again, the report goes into detail about this, so we encourage you to read that if you want broader context or just some other insights. But membership became absolutely critical during the Great Recession. The number one priority was around keeping the members an association already had. So how can we really minimize any hemorrhaging of members, knowing that they're probably struggling to pay dues or to participate in activities. Employer support might be declining really significantly, or they might even be losing their jobs. In the case of trade associations, they really might be impacted significantly with their cash flows. New member acquisition was also really important. So those peaked at a really high, almost 1 in 2 respondents saying that that's where their attention was focused. It's interesting, and you can really see it with this graph in particular, that as we came out of the Great Recession and conditions improved, associations became much more scattered in where they were focused. So we didn't have the 50% agreement around 1 or 2 specific priorities. It really became a more diversified focus. And we only pulled out 4 priorities for the webinar today, but there are a number of other ones that we report on in this study. Membership retention is a really important indicator of how associations are doing. When we look back to the Great Recession, association membership did drop very sharply, but interestingly, it returned to its normal um, within 10 years, which obviously is a pretty long time frame. Um, but it's 10, or I'm sorry, it's peak hit in 2011. So it really only took a couple of years to really hit that high. And then you can see how it continued to increase over time. In the report, we talk about signs that the economy was contracting and even that associations were starting to see some declines in their performance. And you can see on this slide in 2020, we did see a decrease in the number of associations saying that their retention rate had increased. It did drop to 13%. This again was before any COVID-19 developments. So what are the takeaways of the Great Recession? What did we learn from that time period? Again, lots of detail in the report, but to cover it really broadly. So one of the first major areas of focus for associations was to just return to the core. Membership, retaining members was absolutely critical. I would bet a lot of you are experiencing this now. It changes very rapidly. You're trying to be right there in the corner with your members, understand what they need, respond to calls. Customer service becomes absolutely essential. And I would bet that if we were to study it during times of crisis, I bet we would see really exceptional practices. If not, they should be that. There should absolutely be as rapid as possible a response time when a member calls, because members are looking for technical guidance, they're looking to connect with others, but they're also looking to just know that they are heard by the association, and that can make have a really big impact on their experience with the organization, and also their emotional connection to the organization, things like loyalty or pride in the organization, how the organization was really there for them in a tough time. So get back to your core of membership. Also investing in membership. So we saw that quite a few associations cut staff during the Great Recession. Membership was the only area that organizations reported investing more in that area, not significantly, obviously, but they recognized that they had to put resources behind that department and that function, whether it was a new hire or shifting responsibility or everyone kind of getting on board with supporting members. That became critical for them. Fostering community is part of the value proposition. So that's different in our current climate, because most of us think of community, or certainly think of community as a face-to-face experience, and now it's obviously virtual. But being able to continue to foster that, make sure that people can network and have the camaraderie that they're seeking, and also for those of you who have industry partners, sponsors, or advertisers, thinking about how you can create opportunities for them to connect with the community as well. Obviously, timely, trusted information. I think that's especially crucial right now, given everything that is developing. So doubling down on that area, trying to gather the information as quickly as possible, but also get it out to your members. I was talking to a healthcare organization a few weeks ago, and they mentioned a webinar that it wasn't a new series for them, but a particular webinar that brought together hospital executives who could really talk about how they were dealing with the unfolding conditions within their organizations. And attendance was very high. That takes minimal effort to put together. It's really just creating a forum for your members to talk to each other. So those kinds of real-time channels and venues are really powerful resources for your members. And then finally, revenue diversification. So this looks so different today. It's hard to believe, although we all know this, that during the Great Recession, what really took a hit for organizations was obviously membership, but also meeting attendance and sponsorship and advertisement. Well, today that's completely dried up. So again, we went back to the Great Recession to see what we could learn, but recognized that things might not look exactly like they did during our last crisis. All right, let me walk you through our, we'll call them real-time research trackers, and then we'll get to your questions, have some conversation. So the COVID-19 impact trackers that we have launched, we also are undertaking this initiative with Association Analytics. And we are aiming to collect data on two fronts. One is to understand how COVID-19 has impacted associations. Some of the questions are quite similar to the questions we just walked through, so our association viewpoint questions. Some are new. Each week we introduce and rotate a new question or two, and we'll show you some of those, and there will be obviously more that we launch and introduce in the coming weeks. Then we've also launched a member impact tracker, thinking that that data would be valuable for associations to understand how industries are being impacted through the lens of the membership. And that has obviously taken more coordination with associations, so we don't have as much data back. We're not fully launched with that tool. I'll give you a sense of the questions that we are asking. I don't have any data to share on that today, but definitely stay tuned. We would love to have your participation in either or both of these. They're both complementary to participate in. And even if you don't participate, you can certainly access the data. Okay, let me share the first one. So this was especially important, I want to say a couple of weeks ago. How could associations not see sixes, because at the time only C3s qualified, but how could associations get some of the urgent cash and support they needed to sustain certainly their staff, cover payroll, and keep their organizations functioning? So I'll let you take a look at this because you'll probably immediately want to look at those sectors that are similar to your own. But we have quite a few who actually did apply for Kerrs Act relief, over 1 and 2. And quite a few of them applied for the Paycheck Protection Program, 62%. And then we see a variety of funding that associations sought. Again, we ask about concerns for respondents' associations. So what is concern around the economic impact of COVID-19 on the industry or profession? That was quite high, 83%. On your association, somewhat lower, just 2% lower. I will say that the first week that this data came back, the numbers were significantly lower. And when I looked at that data myself, I thought, I'm sure these are going to change over time. I didn't know how quickly they would, but it's not surprising. Obviously, it's hard to find any area of the economy or any sector that isn't impacted by this in some way. Concerns are also quite high for health and well-being of professionals. I want to highlight that because I'm going to show you a slide in a minute that we can look at compared to. So concern is high, and we'll look at what associations are doing around that. And then some of the things that are less of a concern for organizations, and I want to highlight these because I think this also reflects the strong position that associations are in. If you look to the bottom, concerns around the ability of the association to respond to the needs of members, and also for staff to operate effectively. Those percentages are quite low, and I think that that is really testament to, again, the work that associations did coming out of the Great Recession, or even during the Great Recession. How do we get smarter? How do we fortify our operations? And I think that this is evidence of that. If you remember those actions that we highlighted for you all from 2020 and well, through the association viewpoint study. We look at it again here. And I believe this data is going to continue to change pretty significantly over the coming weeks or months. Hiring freeze, which honestly certainly has an impact on current staff. It means you're going to have to do more work, but it doesn't have any direct impact on the current staff in the sense that they lose their jobs or they're furloughed. So hiring freeze was the first place that associations, or is the first place that the associations seem to be turning to try to cut expenses. The other percentages are, again, I believe relatively low given where we are, but I think they'll change as things continue to unfold, or maybe conditions will change really rapidly and the country really will get back to a more solid footing. Obviously not where we were coming into this. I'm sure that will take quite a bit of time. But when we look at staff layoffs, reduction of benefits, staff hours, furloughs, salary reductions, those are all not even quite 1 in 3 who are saying that that will either, that's happening now or that will happen. For conferences and meetings, if you look at the teal and the purple bars here, basically all associations have experienced some kind of meeting cancellation or postponement, of course. Quite a few have shifted from in-person to virtual, so associations are looking for alternative solutions, and respondents are somewhat mixed. Some have already recouped losses because of those meetings cancellations, and some say that that will happen. It hasn't happened yet. A surprising number say that it won't happen. It'd be interesting to see which cities those were, which venues allowed them to get out of those meetings. I think it's probably also a reflection of smaller meetings where the penalties aren't quite as stiff. Which of the following do you expect to happen in terms of operations? So this gives us some insight into new things that associations might be doing or how their priorities are shifting. Quite a few associations are saying that they're developing new programs to support members. They're also doing financial analysis and scenario planning. By the way, we had a webinar on that topic a few weeks ago. And when you get the follow-up email, there'll be a reference to how you can access that. So if you're not sure how to do that, but are looking at this and thinking, oh, maybe my organization should be, we have a resource for you on that. Also, reduction in spending. So I think that associations are looking to cut costs in, again, as least painful ways as possible, and certainly reducing spending without needing to cut into staff is one of the less severe ways to address that. If we look towards the bottom of this slide, there are fewer saying that this is happening now, quite a few saying that it will happen, but later on, as things start to settle, associations are likely to do things like eliminate some programs, which honestly could be a very smart move, whether it's a crisis or not, because we know that a lot of associations are doing things that they don't even necessarily want to be doing, but it was dreamed up by a committee or a volunteer leader, a prominent volunteer leader, and it's really hard to let go or to stop doing that program. So think of this current atmosphere as an ideal time to try to take advantage of opportunities to really streamline and get smart about what you're doing, smart and very focused about what you're doing. And then finally, of course, needing to tap associations' reserves. It's wonderful that associations have that, but at a time when portfolios are likely declining pretty significantly, most volunteer leaders and staff would much rather not have to do that. We asked a follow-up question. So what are some of the programs or activities that the respondents associations will be looking at in the next couple of months and offering to members? So more virtual and remote networking opportunities. I think we're all learning how to do that better. and hopefully the technology continues to improve. But it gets back to that idea I mentioned earlier. How do you maintain community? How do you foster community in a time like this? Online education is another really important area of focus for associations. Data, increased advocacy, and then here's the reference I made a couple slides back. Not a lot of associations are investing resources around members' well-being, but if you recall, concerns were pretty high for members' well-being. So that might be an area as you scrambled to just, answer those technical questions or respond to urgent needs. As you settle in from that, this might be a new area to pivot to. Really health and well-being, so important. And for longer term direction, so thinking about either a few months from now when associations are still in this crisis or coming out of this crisis, trying to really leverage virtual platforms and travel. Probably all of you are on the road quite a bit. Certainly your volunteer leaders are probably on the road. So can we really learn something from this and leverage virtual more to foster community? Keeping up with the financial and organizational scenario planning. So when something else hits, if something else hits, what would that look like? How will your association respond? Each time you go through that exercise, hopefully you're learning and getting better and really strengthening your resources and expertise in that area. And then we start to see decrease in focus or consensus around these. So being able to rapidly introduce a new product, being able to listen to your members better, collaborations, and then governance structures are lower areas of focus. I mentioned the member impact tracker, so we launched that at the same time. It's just required a bit more time to get it out in the field and coordinate with our sponsoring associations. But the areas we're exploring in that study, so again, the perceived impact of COVID-19. So how has the crisis impacted the industries, the professions, job prospects or job standing, working arrangements, other conditions? We also ask how the association can better support members, and then other reflections and insights. And we also have a rotating question in this tracker as well. And finally, in the report, we look back. I already shared the lessons that we learned from the Great Recession, but we also gave some thought to what might be happening over the coming year and try to give some guidance to associations on where they should focus. So the first one is about rapid innovation. Again, when we think about how rapidly this crisis evolved, how can associations get better and faster at really responding to member needs? There are a couple legacy things. Conference contracts, when you book out 10 years or 15 years, is there a way to compress that? It really is not to any association's advantage to have those kinds of pressures. Governance structures where decision making is really challenging. If that's the case for an association, it's probably been really tough over the past couple of months. Another area that we continue to preach about because it's just so critical and we see it as a fundamental aspect of the organizations that we identify as top performing. And it's having clear strategy and then the metrics to be able to measure that strategy and progress. So that can be at an organizational level. It can also be at a product level or even a department level. Where are we going? What's our goal? And how are we going to measure our progress towards that and our performance? Value proposition. So there are some things in the immediacy. Obviously, any industry that's impacted significantly and sees the workforce, high unemployment rates in the workforce, career resources become really essential. And those can have a legacy value for young professionals, even in the day, hopefully soon, when we can look back at this crisis and not be in the middle of it. Industry coalitions, also something that we believe will continue to become important, and information, being able to share that rapidly. Some of the other things that associations told us during the Great Recession, that things that they were doing that they say attributed to their ability to navigate through that time. Having some heightened visibility with members. So you really want to communicate with them and get front and center and know that you are there to serve them. Really important. Something else that respondents mentioned was local events. And that was obviously not during a pandemic, but I think that's really important now as you think about how to replace an in-person event. Is it regional hubs? Is it just regional meetings? How can you really preserve some of the face-to-face opportunity, but obviously do it in a safe way? Engagement with new professionals, anyone coming into the field or industry, also your new members, I would say too. And finally, personalizing your outreach as much as possible, and also telling your story. And if you don't have time to tell the story of the good work you're doing right now, make a note of it and tell it later, because associations, we see a lot of associations actually be quite humble about the value they provide and the work that they do. It's not the time to be humble. You really want to highlight that value because you're working as hard as possible to retain the members. Here are a few other resources that we have. We also have a 2021 game plan that we're putting together. This has some hypotheses about what might be facing associations in the coming year and how associations might respond. Obviously, it's still really early and things are changing a lot, but we wanted to start to put some of those ideas down on paper. So you can definitely look out for that later this year. And we have 2 other webinars coming up over the next 2 weeks. The first is around the topic of the turnaround CEO. And one would argue that every CEO is a turnaround CEO right now. That's not CEO only, so you can definitely participate even if CEO is not your title, because I'm sure that there will be some insights that you could apply to your own role. And then we also have a webinar on pivoting your marketing. Okay, so I've talked quite a bit, and I think let's take a look at these questions that we have. I'm going to go back through. Okay, so we have, Andrea has a question for us and also for the panelists. Andrea asks, when can we resume in-person education and meetings? Networking for our members and revenue for us are crucial. I will tell you, and this, you will not like hearing this, but I feel like it's an informed perspective, so it's probably important to hear that we did a webinar a few weeks ago on decision-making and governance. And it was a really good webinar. It was very rich with content, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity for the participants to talk to each other. And so we decided to do a follow-up informal community circle with the participants of that webinar. I don't know if any of you were on that. If you were and you want to comment, please chime in. In that session, Chris Buskey, who is the CEO of the Infectious Diseases Society of America, joined. And he had some sobering messages. He says that an association should really not think about having an in-person meeting before the end of 2021. He said that because of the vaccine and the likelihood of that coming out, and just the likelihood that associations, certainly for the large, I should say for large conventions and meetings, not for smaller ones. So if we take that, which is probably one of the more pessimistic or conservative estimates about how long it will take, I think that forces an association to think about, from a revenue perspective, also a community perspective, how can you come up with a creative solution or a workaround to that, or an innovation that will allow you to obviously ensure your financial stability, and also provide that venue and that connection that a lot of members are seeking. So I can't say exactly when that's going to happen. Um, I think it will be interesting to see what happens with ASAE's annual meeting, to be honest. Probably a lot of us are looking at that as a model, and I think they're going to do something innovative with it. I really don't know all the details. Probably for many reasons they've kept hush about that. But I think the important thing will be to really look across the community and turn to the sources that have expertise. There are many of those out there, and quite a bit of content is free right now. So try to look for those really intriguing models and just start building a plan for an alternative. And hopefully you won't have to use it, but if you do, at least you'll have given that some thought and some preparation before maybe things get really dire for the organization. And then Lauren, you asked, the most pressing question we have is how to approach outstanding membership renewals and upcoming renewals. I've seen this a lot on ASAE's Collaborate site. Quite a few have asked this question. I would say that, first of all, let me point to what we know from the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, there were quite a few associations that said that it became a priority to accommodate members, to recognize that their financial resources were limited, and to whatever extent possible, make membership something that they could retain. So whether that be working with your members, or reducing their dues, or even waiving their dues. I understand that that could be really, it possibly could not be feasible for you right now, given other financial stresses. But I think at the very least, in any messaging communication, you want to proactively enforce and acknowledge that you understand that they're in a tough situation, and that you will try your best to accommodate them through X, Y, or Z, or by having them contact you directly. There are quite a few for-profits out there that you can turn to see really some exemplary customer service and engagement and customer support. Quite a few people are not fans of United. I happen to be, and I've really become a fan of United over the past few months. They communicated very little, but when they did, it was spot on. And, again, like, look at the for-profit sector. How are they communicating? What is it that they're offering? And think creatively and do some financial analysis on this front. How much can you afford to give up in your membership revenue area? But at the very least, make sure that your messages are not tone deaf, because that could really hurt you in the long term. The last thing I'll say too is to remember that the lifelong value of a member is quite high. It's probably quite high for your association. I'm not sure which association that is, but I'm guessing. And so again, you really don't want to lose a member, or worse, kind of cause bad sentiment with a member. You really want them to feel good about the organization. If they do have to drop membership and you can't carry them during that time, that they'll come back as soon as it's possible for them to come back. Okay, and Beth asks how to work well with risk-averse members when new ways to do things are acquired. Yeah, that's a tough one, especially if it happens to be volunteer leader members and you need them to provide direction. Okay, so how do you work with risk-averse members? I am a big fan of, well, first of all, financial analysis and scenario planning. The way that we have done it in the past, and some associations have done it, is quite sophisticated and technical. So I'm going to assume that that's a little too much for your association. Even if you created very basic scenarios. So you raise the red flag and say, if we do not make a change or we do not address this, here's what it's going to look like. Data is very neutral. So it allows members who understandably are dealing with a lot, for whatever reason, do not want to change. It allows you to at least begin to have the conversation, hopefully advance the conversation. You can also look for champions within your membership. So who do you know is really a change agent, and how can you get them to formally in a board meeting really challenge someone who's trying to pull the group back or pull the culture back when you really need to be changing. Look for those individuals that can really support your cause. And then finally, I would say what is very neutral besides data is a common cause. So if you're able to really work with those members and reinforce that you're all aiming for the same end goal, and how you get there is the decision that, or the process that is on the table, then that can also work to just, I don't know, get people out of their own heads and really moving forward. Okay, let me take a look at Roger's question here. Yes, this is a good question. I like it. He asks, are norms forming around expectations of free versus paid virtual experiences of events and content? That would be a great question to ask in one of our tracker surveys. And I know I have some of McKinley's research team members on the webinar here today. So we'll definitely make note of this. I don't know what that's going to look like, other than to say that just last night I was thinking how everyone has an expectation of something free right now because everyone is being so accommodating. And to be honest, I think even people who don't need it are probably asking for accommodation. So I think that we were living in a society where expectations for free content and free participation were quite high. And I think at least during this crisis, they could potentially continue to increase. But yeah, I would love to ask that question and get some data around it. And Roger, let you know what things are looking like. Okay, and George, who's my colleague at McKinley, has a question for all of you. He says, there may be some members who have more resources than others and are looking for opportunities to give back, help out the association. We're curious if anyone has heard from members offering to pay dues for those who can't pay. Is a hardship program like that scalable? So that, Lauren, is another angle that you could take for this. Has anyone had any experience with creating a support fund? I feel like Associations Now Daily had an article on this. I'm really plugging ASAE today, but they do have great resources. I feel like I read about that. It might have been in another source. It certainly might be relevant when you think about graduates, college, university graduates. You know, I can't imagine the stress that they feel trying to get into the workforce. So if you have student members, conversion rates are always so low for them when they're moving to full membership. So that might be an area that you could target. And I think a lot of your long tenured members would be, if they're able, would be quite supportive of that audience in particular, and making sure they can continue to engage. All right, wonderful. Well, it looks like that covers all of our questions today. Thank you again for joining us. We hope this was helpful to you, and both the data that we were able to capture in 2020, but also for the data that we were able to capture 10 years ago that gives us some insights. We're going to have a mid-year study in 2020, so stay tuned for more data. We'll be able to compare that late February, March data to a point in time later this year, and that should give us some good insight. So please stay tuned. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.